Hello, everyone. So I'm joined here today by Layna, who is a local leader. And yeah, we'll be talking about equity, diversity, and inclusion within student organizations and why it's important and things along those lines. So, Layna, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure thing. Thank you, Alan. My name is Layna Teitelbaum. I'm a senior at Northwood High School, as well as president of the Montgomery County Regional SGA, and involved in a variety of other student organizations.
Great, awesome. Yeah, so to dive right in, what does MCR-SGA do? Talk about your capacity within your role as president and anything you think is relevant.
So MCR-SGA does a lot within the Montgomery County school system and getting students involved in student advocacy, as well as personally advocating for changes that we want to see that are approved by about our 100-person executive board, who votes and then decides on resolutions that we want to then support either to the Board of Education, to the County Council, and so forth. And so we do a lot in terms of just trying to get students involved and learn more about what student advocacy is and how they can use their voice, even just as a student involved in a sea of 50,000, I believe, plus students in MCPS. And so we just really try to encourage that students use their voice and get involved with us, as well as our, slew of other organizations that we work with, so that they can kind of take the time before they head off to college and into the real world to learn about how much local legislation and local government can do.
No, yeah, that's great. And I think along those lines of really giving students a platform to use their voice. We've seen that, especially this year, there's been a lot of outcry of certain schools, specifically Black and brown neighborhoods and lower income schools that may not have had representation before and who are now starting to get some bits of representation and a seat at the table. So could you talk about how MCR has committed itself to diversity and inclusion and what it's done to address that?
Absolutely. So most importantly that I would like to say is that I am from one of these areas. I go to an underrepresented school that has a lack of involvement, has a lack of resources. I've really seen these things firsthand. And so although I might not be a Black or brown student who faces even more disparities due to their skin color, I 100% am seeing a lot of these things that happen in our school system that let these students who are in underrepresented areas kind of fall through the cracks and not get involved. And so I ran my campaign on this, and I really tried to emphasize this year that the biggest thing we can do is host so many different opportunities where if one student sees it or a school SGA sees it, it'll kind of grab their attention and continue to get them involved. And so from there, once the student goes to one event, they learn about MCR and can continue to kind of be aware of what we're doing and stay involved to whatever degree they would like to be. We started off the year doing our weekend workshops, which was a really simple way to introduce MCR and allow students to learn a variety of things, including graphic design, tips for email writing. Super simple, but allowed us to kind of start off on the right foot and show our organization and show what we do. And from there, we've been building our student network to do things like our language coordinator, which is going to be putting out material in a variety of different languages that are prominent in our areas, as well as things like appointing project DCC and Connect liaisons that represent two really important areas that are often underrepresented in student advocacy, so that they're directly talking with their students and bringing them to MCR so that we can keep getting these students involved, even if they're not directly members of the executive board.
Yeah, awesome. I think it's great that we've seen such strides to, include not only the NEC and DCC, but other underrepresented schools within MCPS, such as Gaithersburg, Seneca Valley, and Watkins Mill. And along those topics, I know that you mentioned that you're a student in the DCC, so you firsthand see these disparities and this lack of resources and opportunities. So I guess, when did you know that you wanted to run not only for MCR president, but run on this platform of inclusion and diversity?
That's a great question. I honestly did never expect to be in this position. I never thought that I was going to be, what I would think is a prominent leader in MCPS. I got involved in MCR not until my sophomore year. A lot of students start even in middle school in our middle school counterpart. I had no clue about MCR until sophomore year, which is just testimony to the fact that we aren't reaching students early enough in these schools. But when I got involved, I started in our public relations department, and our social media began to grow, and that's when I really realized that our social media outreach and the outreach that we're doing instead of just what we're doing within MCR is one of the most important things that we can be doing to keep getting students involved. And so especially in a year like this, when we're going virtual and doing all these events, it was super important to me to be able to keep doing this outreach via social media, via our emailing lists, and all of these other ways that we communicate with outside students from MCPS that aren't directly involved with us. And so I think for me, when I decided to run, it was really a moment where I knew that we hadn't had an underrepresented voice in leadership, especially as president, in a long time. And so it was something where we saw a lot of males. We saw a lot of males from highly represented areas. And so I just kind of went for it with the hopes of, even if I don't win, I'm going to share these ideas that someone else will cling on to and will make happen. And fortunately for me, obviously I'm here now and did win. But trying to really campaign on the fact that not everybody knows what MCR is. You know, there are kids that are attending our general assemblies that have never been involved in MCR otherwise. And so, you know, they've taken one step, but they're not the full way there yet. And so it's really just starting to reach so many different students from so many different extracurriculars, social kind of clubs, everything like that, sports that might not have been in MCR already. It was really my goal this year to make that happen. And fortunately, we have been able to do that by things like increasing our mailing lists and things like that.
No, yeah, definitely. I think I can definitely attest to the fact that it has been effective. Or I'm not sure if our viewers know, but I'm actually in MCR, and I joined my senior year, had no idea what it was until senior year. So similar to Layna, where I'm in an area where these opportunities aren't as promoted and as prevalent. So definitely, you know, there has been a lot of outreach, and I think along those topics of all this outreach having to be virtual now. And we see, although, you know, there is that con of everything being virtual and now we can't see each other in person, we also see a pro of more access to communities that might not have been located close to Carver, which is where typically the MCR body meets. Or, you know, it's easier to outreach via the internet, often through social medias. So what has your experience been like running your campaign and being president in this virtual reality?
It's been a great learning lesson. Honestly, it has been something that nobody had experienced before. And so for that reason, we had to get really creative. Campaigning, I would say, is probably easier online than in person. You don't have to, you know, get yourself around the county visiting schools and whatnot. But definitely this year, trying to make it interesting, engaging, and all while being informative was a real challenge, especially because we had a team of officers who had never been officers before. And so I think what we just tried to do is say, you know, MCR has done things in certain ways in the past, and we are going to build on that, but we are going to completely change it to the best of our abilities. And I think we've really seen how beneficial that has been, because although we are online, we have seen such high, probably even higher engagement than previous years, because students aren't faced with the difficulty of getting to Rockville from wherever in the county late during traffic. And so I think it's really something I would urge whoever comes after me to keep working through, keep making sure that you can host some, if not all, events virtual with the opportunity to be in person once it's safe, because it really has shown us that it is so much more effective on all fronts for students.
Yeah, and I know you sort of touched on this a little bit there at the end, but yeah, what do you really see happening with MCR within this next school year? I know that we have elections coming up at the end of this week. So what do you envision for MCR's future?
I think that it is going to be a big year next year. We have seen a lot of conversation continue to build regarding the importance for this type of equity and involvement from students everywhere. And so, you know, this is never going to happen in 1 year. As much as I would have loved to make it happen, it was never going to be able to go from nothing to full percent engagement from schools everywhere. And so for that reason, I think next year is going to be a big building block in terms of building on the base that we have already kind of created this year. And I think it's going to be really challenging for this next team to take on, maybe going in person, maybe staying virtual for some of it, but trying to keep these elements of virtual events all while kind of bringing students back into schools where they have concerns about their safety and whatnot. And then on top of that, having the biggest conversation of how are we going to keep getting more students involved.
No, yeah, and I think that is definitely a conversation that has to be had. And I know that there's been a lot of outcry and disappointment, with how things may have been in the past. But I definitely think that there have been a lot of strides made, not only within this past year, but looking forward to. And, respectively, so a lot of people are tired of this lack of representation and this lack of a seat at the table. But now that, we're finally getting that glimpse of what it could be, I guess, why do you think it is important to continue to, make these efforts and these strides to include people, and not only create opportunities, but intentionally fill them with people who are stakeholders and are affected?
For sure. I think the biggest thing is that it's a very hard balance of encouraging students, especially the most important thing students can do is apply to the executive board. But from that point, we do our applications school blind. And so from applications, once they're closed, we have no clue who we're appointing. We just know that their applications were the best of the best. And so I think that encouraging students to get to that point of applying is so important, but also making sure that when they are applying, they're really putting forth their best effort in terms of making sure that they have other curriculars or leadership opportunities that they may have gotten involved with that they can share with us, or show how passionate they might be to the organization. Because I think that if we really want change, it's going to have to come from a new group of students getting involved.
No, yeah, agreed. And on that topic, I guess anyone watching, why do you think it is important to be involved within student government and student leadership and advocacy?
Yeah, I think that honestly, students don't realize how much adults around us are listening. I think that oftentimes the Board of Education, the county council will actually look to us instead of us going to them, because we have so many students and only so many adults representing us. And so I think as much as we can do to get the student voice out there and get a range of students advocating for different things, because everyone is going to have their own interests. Some students may focus on menstrual equity, while others may focus on standardized testing. And so there are so many things that people can get involved with and kind of find their niche, if you will. And so at that point, the adults are listening. They want to hear what we think about these things. You just have to get your voice to the adults.
No, yeah, I think that's a great way to end this episode. But I think you brought up some great points of, not only why it's important to have those equitable organizations that include diverse populations, but also the encouragement of students to fill those roles. So often these opportunities are created, but they're not necessarily promoted in the most equitable way or given to people who are affected by those issues. So thank you so much for spending the time with us to talk about MCR and all your leadership within Montgomery County.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.